Mobster culture is something that I've recently grown an interest towards since I last played Mafia 2, which is a great game by the way, and I highly recommend it. While I haven't gone through a binge of every gangster movie yet, one of the movies that I last watched on Netflix was Goodfellas, which is also my first Martin Scorsese movie, and I kinda liked it. I might consider doing a video on it after I get a more stronger opinion, but that's best for another time. Anyway, Gangster Squad was also one of those movies that I watched right after Goodfellas, but unlike Goodfellas, I didn't actually enjoy it that much. Not because it was awful, but it wasn't anything beyond fine either. Before I start the video, I might be repeating a bit of my opinions more often as just anything mediocre, because that's how this movie comes off as in every single aspect, mediocre. So, here's a fun drinking game to cope with the video. Take a shot every time that I mention something is mediocre or generic or anything that's synonymous with that. Because like I said before, that's how the movie is itself. And by take a shot, I mean a shot of hot sauce. Because that's how bad it might as well be. So let's go ahead and start with the plot. So for those of you who haven't seen the movie yet but don't want to be spoiled by the story, I'll start off with a spoiler-free version of the plot, and then you can go ahead and skip the detailed version. Now, of course, I'm going to be talking also more depth and possibly include spoilers for other sections, but you can decide about that if you want to skip it or just go ahead and watch it. Anyway, the movie's spoiler-free plot is basically a guerrilla team of police officers stop a mobster boss from taking over Los Angeles. The end. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and start with the spoiler version of the plot summary. So if you want to actually go ahead with that, then feel free to do so. Otherwise, here's the timestamp. And 3, 2, 1. The movie starts off with establishing the main antagonist, who is Mickey Cohen, and he wants to take over LA by setting up some undercover operations and buying his way into total control. But an honest cop by the name of John O'Mara takes down one of his operations, which is a brothel. And after getting into the news because of that, Bill Parker, the chief of LAPD, assigns John into a mission to take down Cohen's operations and lets him assemble a group. John tries to get one of his colleagues, Jerry Wooters, to join in, but he doesn't really seem too convinced, so John moves on with the rest of the candidates. Afterwards, the squad begins their mission in Burbank, starting with an attempt to rob a casino, but their failure left John and one of the members, Coleman Harris, behind bars. Meanwhile, Wooters finally decides to help John out after one of his friends gets killed by one of Cohen's crooks and falls in love with Grace Faraday, a rising star being held off by Cohen himself. The gang officially start their work by bugging Cohen's house with microphones so that they can eavesdrop him and find any of his other secret operations. They later find out that a major scheme was hiding underneath a nightclub, and they burn down the basement of it, not the actual nightclub. But then Cohen finally realizes that the squad are behind it after hearing that there was no money taken from the basement, and then searches around his house for microphones. When he finds the planted ones, he misleads the squad to a fake operation at Chinatown so that he can eliminate them, and he also sends a bodyguard to the squad's eavesdropping location in order to kill one of the members listening in. This broke down the Gangster Squad, and John has lost motivation to fight for LA. But then Grace finds John and reveals that she witnessed Cohen kill someone as proof for his criminal behavior, which can take him to court. The movie ends when the squad reassembles and try to catch Cohen once and for all, and arrest him in order to restore peace in LA. The overall story is just generic, even for the genre and type of plot it's going for, which kinda sucks. Just another movie that goes along the lines of bad guy wants to take over city, good guys make a team and stop bad guy, good guys lose once and finally get bad guy arrested in the end. Now that you get to the plot, let's get to the real critique of the movie. The writing. The movie doesn't have an incredible story, but like most of it, it's just serviceable enough. So the main part of the movie is the squad itself. So what works and doesn't work with them, you might be asking? Well, to start off, the squad does have some unique characters, but it's almost as if each of the members are written off as stereotypes or just have plain descriptions. So Conwell Keeler, who is like the technician of the group, he's written off as the nerdy brains because glasses. Max Kennard is a sharpshooting cowboy, and Coleman Harris runs around with a tiny knife. The main guy, John O'Mara, who assembled the team, he doesn't have anything going for him either, just as a honest cop trying to save the city. That's it. And Jerry Wooters is like a nice guy, I think.
You gotta do that in front of me. You gotta make yourself pretty for him in front of me.
I'm not exactly sure, but point is, they're all just not written well. Apart from that, there really isn't any conflict between the members, so this makes the team seem less interesting to invest in. And that's not how a team should work in these kinds of movies. The main reason that a team has conflict isn't just to entertain the audience, but it also shows the difference between the members and their imperfections. It sets a starting point for how these members progress from the first act or whenever the team is established, and builds up to the resolution when they finally agree to work together for the same goal and put aside their quarrels. You see this work best in movies like The Avengers, The Incredibles. Now, granted, they're not actually any similar genre as Gangster Squad, but the point is that they're all starting off with some rough introduction, and they eventually learn to build up the team properly and have a successful dynamic. But in Gangster Squad, everyone in the group acts as if nothing is wrong with each other and that there's no unique part in the group apart from like stereotype roles from the members. The only thing closest to conflict is when Keeler was curious about Jerry Wooters' relationship with Grace, but then nothing happens after that.
So that's it? What, we some kind of...
Gangster Squad.
All the characters also don't have much development on their own, even the squad members. All we have for character arcs are John going from a cop trying to fight for the safety of the city and his family, to retiring after successfully taking down Cohen, to Jerry Wooters trying to get a girl who's stuck with a bad guy. Max Kennard's partner manages to become another sharpshooter by the end of the movie, and Mickey Cohen's rise and fall to power. Speaking of which, Mickey Cohen in this movie doesn't seem to have anything more unique than just a generic gangster villain rising to the top, except that he makes his judgments really violent. I mean, I kinda tolerate him as the bad guy fit for the story, but that's only because the writing itself doesn't do anything more than where it is, which is kinda disappointing as well. I'm not familiar with movies where Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone are always the destined pair, so I can't critique their previous performances in movies like Crazy Stupid Love and La La Land. However, I can still say that the chemistry between Jerry Wooters and Grace Faraday makes no sense, or at the very least doesn't have enough time to develop throughout the movie. The movie's entire plot seems to take place during weeks, but their relationship's pacing somehow gets rushed from a hookup to what seems to be a slightly strong relationship in a matter of a few days. If their relationship was actually meant to have some importance, then they really shouldn't try to force it in within a small time period. Now, everything about this movie's writing would be fine as just another action thriller set in the 40s, and I would have ended this section here, but since this movie is actually based on real historical events, we have to throw some of that away and see how it works as a fictionalized account. So, let's start with the real history behind Mickey Cohen. For one, the LAPD didn't arrest him for murdering his accomplices or anything that you've seen in the movie, but rather for tax evasion alone. Of course, this probably wouldn't have made the movie more interesting, like I'd be pumped to see a guy weasel his way out of paying his actual taxes, but claiming that the movie's version was accurate is misleading. Secondly, the Gangster Squad was also much larger than 6, and while I didn't mind that there were fewer members to make it less convoluted, the fact that each member was different for the sake of unnecessary diversity and other stereotypes just doesn't work. I definitely wasn't expecting some Oscar level writing from this movie, since it is nothing more than just another action thriller, but I would have loved a better story and more solidly written characters to fit in this great time period of 1940s LA. And if it really was supposed to be a fictionalized account, at least try to play to the history a bit more accurately. I never knew about Cohen's past until Gangster Squad, but that didn't even do a good job documenting some of it, and I had to find the real story outside of the movie. The funny thing is that the movie started claiming that it was inspired by a true story for a bit, and then recent editions of the movie scrapped off that message to avoid any more controversy. How do I know that's true? Well, for one thing, a YouTuber by the name of Film the Right Thing did a commentary reaction video of Gangster Squad, and his version of the movie had the message inspired by a true story. Whereas the one that I watched was on Netflix, and most movies on Netflix are up to date, so this version didn't have the message at all. The cinematography? The movie's just plain boring to watch, which made it kinda hard to sit through the video. I don't even feel like editing this video. The editing ranges from not good to just plain mediocre for a generic action movie. I did notice some interesting choices to freshen it up a little, but they didn't really work well enough. One of the editing choices was somewhere in the first act of the movie. There's this elevator fight scene, and in that scene there were two instances where the camera just made some swish tilts like it was from a stop motion film or something. Then later in the film, during another brawl at a Burbank PD jail cell, there are these photo frames edited in the fight scenes as if it were taken from a camera. The lighting is probably the worst thing about the cinematography. In day and night scenes, it looks alright. There's nothing really impressive about it, but that's to be expected. But for the interior scenes where it should be well lit, it looks as if the lighting crew used candles instead of actual lighting. Also, there's like a good chunk of slow-mo scenes for some reason, which mostly don't do anything to the plot. Even the beginning one, which is just introducing Mickey Cohen. It's almost as if from behind the scenes, when Ruben Fleischer and the editing crew were almost done, Zack Snyder swooped into the editing room one day, and then when he looked at the movie, he was like, "The movie looks fine so far, but it's pretty boring. Maybe you could throw in some completely pointless CGI shots which actually make no sense to the plot. I know it doesn't do anything, but it just looks good." And then Ruben Fleischer was like, "Oh, well, now that I think about it, my movie does look a lot more boring without him. So I guess we couldn't mind spending some millions of dollars into the budget just to make these scenes which make no sense at all." By the way, Hollywood, can we please stop oversaturating most movies with these dumb scenes? Unless they have any use to the plot. No? Oh well, I guess I'll fuck myself off then. The performance? I'm not the best at observing how actors carry out a movie with their performance, but from what I watched, I feel as if there isn't anything past the bare minimum. Despite the list of some great actors, I don't feel like they're doing enough to bring out their characters. Josh Brolin is a pretty good actor amongst them. I haven't seen his roles in many movies like Infinity War or Endgame, although I am kind of aware of how he portrays Thanos. But in Gangster Squad, he kinda does the job right as the protagonist, who is an honest cop trying to protect LA and his dignity to the law. But that's about it. His character isn't anything memorable or great apart from just fitting the role. Sean Penn was probably a decent actor as the main villain, but I didn't like how his character is more of a Joe Pesci caricature than an actually intimidating gangster on his own.
Here comes Santa Claus!
He did seem a bit threatening with his violent tendencies, but that's pretty much how every mobster boss acts now. Ryan Gosling does a good job in his role as well, but I don't understand why he has that high-pitched voice.
Oh, look, it's Pete. No, it's repeat. It's repeat.
Who the hell was that? Guy's got a voice like Woody fucking Woodpecker.
Emma Stone is also not a good actor, but she somehow doesn't get more in her role than just a damsel for Ryan's character. The whole thing could have been just summed up to everyone does a good job, but there's nothing really interesting about it. The only good thing about Gangster Squad would probably be the choreography of the action scenes, which are somewhat believable, but it does a little more to just entertain the audience. The music. While there wasn't a lot to like in this movie, one of the only few things that were a bit more tolerable was the music. I mean, it still had some problems, but I didn't really dislike it. The licensed soundtrack is pretty decent and does set the mood for scenes like in a casino or anywhere that might host a band concert. And it's also fitting for its time period. Obviously, I probably shouldn't play any of the music because it's copyrighted, but I can tell you that the songs are much better compared to the original soundtrack. Speaking of which, the original soundtrack wasn't problematic, but it was only because it was mediocre as well. The composer responsible was Steve Jablonsky, who isn't some first-timer or amateur musician. He has done a lot of work, like the Transformers movies, Desperate Housewives, Battleship, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Out of the Shadows, Luigi Meets a Combine Soldier, and Luigi Meets a Combine Elite. His work in this movie did just enough to service his background, and that's all I can congratulate him for. He's not a bad guy, it's just that the music doesn't do anything exciting. But I'll give them this. At least it makes sense in the movie's time period, unlike the trailer songs. Again, I'm not gonna play it because it's copyrighted, but who in the hell from Warner Bros. Thought that this was a good idea to market their movie with? Who thought that marketing a movie that's taking place in the 1940s with a rap song that's like from the early 2010s was a really good and smart idea? Conclusion. Gangster Squad just has nothing going great for it. If anything, I'd say I only enjoy the action the most. But that's only because it does enough to be considered an action movie. It feels so forgettable and bland even after multiple viewings, and it's so boring that I don't think anyone else who was behind it remembers working on it. It also made enough money to pay off the budget, but nothing successful like a profit. So not only has everyone lost some amount of money, but they've also got their memories erased. If you like the movie for what it is, that's fine. I just personally don't think it satisfied me with a good mafia related story, or even as a police squad team up. I couldn't even watch it as a good bad movie to laugh at or any sort of action thriller. I don't think I'd consider revisiting Gangster Squad anytime soon. It didn't satisfy me enough. Every time that I finished watching through Gangster Squad, I'd look back at the time that I wasted and wondered, I could have used that time for something else more enjoyable and not mediocre. Something like playing Mafia 2 maybe, or watching Goodfellas again. And that's what I did. I watched Goodfellas again.